and I went traveling, and I wanted to explore Ireland to get to know the land my ancestors were from. I've always had a bit of a fascination with it and with sort of exploring my roots and my heritage. So I fell in love with Galway and that whole western coast, which became the inspiration for Franny's home. And I also went to Iceland, which is where I kind of fell in love with incredible Arctic scenery, but also the grey lag goose, which I felt connected to them for some reason. And it started me thinking about migratory birds and those incredible journeys that they take and the type of people that study those birds. And I think I kind of wanted to know, I thought it would be amazing to be able to follow them and know what these journeys looked like. And so that's obviously where the kind of germ of that idea about an ornithologist came from. So it was Franny who came first for me. It's always character first. And I think as I got to know her and understand more about the journey she was on, I started to realize the kind of world that she needed to be placed in order to be able to tell her story with impact. And also, I guess, to safely engage with my own fear around the climate crisis. So that's kind of how I drew in the environmental side of things. And that was to support her. And then, you know, the more I sort of explored it, the more concerned I became.
I want to get back to Franny in a little bit, but I wanted to talk more about the birds that are at the heart of the story, and specifically the Arctic Tern, which is the bird that Franny is following. Can you tell us a little bit about the Arctic Tern and why you chose that bird in particular to kind of center the story?
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure initially which bird it would be. I've always loved birds, but I definitely am not a birder. I can't kind of look at them and identify what they are. I wish I could. So I was doing a lot of research at the start of this to try and work out, you know, which would be right for the story. And I came across the Arctic Tern and just fell in love with it instantly and knew it was the one. It has the longest migration of any animal on the planet. It flies from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back again every single year. And so because they live for about 30 years, over the course of their lifespans, they'll travel the equivalent distance to the moon and back 3 times, which just seems so gorgeous. You know, I couldn't believe that such beautiful little creatures could go on such epic, amazing journeys. It's such a long distance for them to travel, that it just became a metaphor for courage, I think, for the courage that Franny needed to make her journey. She really took heart from the birds, and I think we all can take heart from them, because, you know, the conditions that they fly in are getting worse and worse every day because of us. So yeah, I think they just sort of, it was a no-brainer for me. They're so beautiful.
I agree. And Franny has such a profound love of the wild, and through her, I think I certainly came to see those birds and, you know, the oceans, just the natural world in general, in a more profound way. And she herself is a sort of migratory animal. She describes her life at the beginning of the book as a migration without a destination. And she is this sort of perpetual wanderer who's always, you know, she kind of has wandering feet. She's always moving from place to place. She has a hard time putting down roots. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about how you came to write her. She's so alive on the page. She has such a kind of visceral, vivid voice. We just know her instantly. So tell us a little bit more about Franny, and specifically what her relationship is to the wild.
Okay, yeah. I can't really describe Franny as anything other than an instinctive thing for me. She sort of arrived and formed her own shape on the page and guided me through the book. I know it seems weird when people say that about their characters, but it's this really strange, true thing that happens. She's migratory like the birds she loves, always moving. I think movement is life for her, just like it is for the birds. And I think she's wilder than most people. She doesn't subscribe to the same values. She doesn't have career ambition or a desire for wealth or stability. She kind of moves through life and the world led more by instinct than anything else. And I really like that idea that, you know, some people are quite creaturely. I think I sort of poured all the things I wish I could be more of into her. She's brave and earthy. She's sort of deeply connected to nature. She doesn't take any shit from anyone. But on the flip side, she's also a really lost soul. She's searching for home and family and belonging. But it's kind of that drive that always makes her leave, that makes it really hard for her to have those things. And that's kind of, we see that particularly manifested in her relationship with her husband, Niall. But I think what the wild means to her, you actually articulated really well once, Carolyn. You said, you described Franny as having found a home and a family in nature because she didn't have a traditional one. And that really struck a chord with me. It felt very true. It sort of felt like in her profound loneliness, she took immense comfort from being in the wild, swimming in the ocean, walking, connecting with animals. It kind of kept her alive when not much else was. And I think that's something that we can all take huge inspiration from. You know, it's immensely nourishing to get outside and be in nature, to be present with wild creatures. And especially now, you know, with the world so crazy, I really have to make a conscious effort to try and do it, because it's not easy particularly when you live in a city. But yeah.
Yes, I've definitely been trying to do more of that, and I feel like one benefit of being locked down is I've started to appreciate the very little bit of nature that it is in kind of your immediate surrounds, like whether that be the birds at the bird feeder or the flowers, you know, on your street, like these little tiny things. But I feel like coming to appreciate those little details is so important as we're, you know, confronting this climate crisis. So kind of in that vein, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your decision to set migrations in a very near future. So it's never explicitly said what year we're in. You know, it's not kind of a dystopian future novel per se. We know that it's not exactly our world. Like, the crisis has advanced to the point that, you know, even more of the world's animals have disappeared in mass extinctions, and there are bans being put in place, even more stringent than now, on commercial fishing. And, you know, we just sort of see a heightened version of our current situation. And as I said at the beginning, like, I think with every passing day, unfortunately, this reality feels closer to our own. But I would love to hear from you why it was really important that you have that sort of ambiguous future setting rather than setting the novel in our immediate present or the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So initially, I didn't set out to write a climate change novel or a dystopian fiction book, but I really wanted to engage with how we connect with nature. And I think the reality is that in this day and age, you kind of can't look at one without looking at the other. So I embraced the kind of climate fiction world and started doing a lot of research into it. And one of the kind of things that still haunts me, and I come back to it all the time, is that in the last 50 years alone, humans have killed off, it's nearly 70% now, of the world's wild animals. And that was just an appalling figure to me. And it was also, even worse was imagining what it's going to be like when it's at 100%, because the number's growing so rapidly. So that kind of immediately projected me into this future that we're barreling towards. And I couldn't stop imagining what it would feel like for us to be alone here and how lonely that would be. And I didn't want to turn this into a dystopian book because I think that focuses a lot on the impact of climate change on us, you know, how our food supplies are going to be affected, how we live. And instead I kind of wanted to, I guess, decentralize us a little bit and look at, instead of looking at what animals can offer us, I wanted to look at the loss of them purely because of how sort of wonderful they are and how much they deserve to be here, just in their own right. So I think putting this little moment into the future, kind of, it can definitely provide a richer way to explore that sort of existential emotional crisis for us, and to make the future seem as close as it probably is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's so much urgency in that thread of the book, and I think you can't read this book and not just feel in your body what this loss would mean. But, you know, I think another important element of this story, and something that was really galvanizing for me as a reader, and I think is so moving to so many people who encounter Franny and her story, is that you never lose the sense of hope. Like, there's so much darkness in this book, but also so much hope. And, you know, without giving too much away, it is not you know, like, there's, in the novel, you don't get the sense that they've gotten to the point of no return. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about the decision to, or just kind of the importance of hope in a story like this, and kind of what hope even means to you in this moment, when things are so dire.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. I mean, the book does seem sort of unbearably grim, but it's actually not. The whole point of it is that it's full of hope and its pages are full of love. It does depict a grim future, but we're not there yet. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to scream to the world. I think in some ways Franny's kind of like us, like all of humanity. She's lost hope and she's embraced self-destruction. And that's something that we can kind of, it's a bit of a trap that we can fall into, because it's very easy to, I guess, feel like the bad news is saturating us, and we shift into this apathetic state of emotional survival, I think. But, you know, I think it's by reconnecting with the people around her and with the natural world that she loves so much that she actually finds the courage to hope again. And that's something that we all need to be able to find, because hope is energizing. It gives us the energy we need to make change, to fight for the things we don't want to lose. There's so much we haven't lost yet. And hope also, I think, shifts our perspectives and allows us to see all the good things, our own ability to be nurturing and kind and generous. Those are the things that matter. We can be nurturing to each other and to this planet. And that's the main message I wanted to get across with this book, I think.
That's so beautifully said, and you definitely do get that across in this story.
That's good.
That sort of brings us back to something we touched on earlier, which is that there are really profound human relationships in this book as well. It's an incredibly epic love story between Franny and her husband Niall. She has a really interesting relationship with the crew of the boat that she's on, you know, the kind of like wonderful intricacies of that life. So tell us a little bit more about the people that Franny loves, and specifically her husband, and kind of that relationship, which I think is so special.
Yeah. Well, so Franny meets her. She sits in on a lecture at university. She's not enrolled. She cleans the university, and she sits in on this ornithology lecture by a man called Niall Lynch. And they sort of immediately have this incredible, very passionate connection that kind of shocks them both, I think. And of course, it becomes quite tumultuous because of this wandering thing that Franny has, which drives her to always be leaving. But I think he offers her some really interesting insights into the way she kind of moves through the world. And, he kind of inspires her to study the things that she loves, and to know that, in fact, studying those things doesn't have to take the magic out of them. And I think Niall's also a man who probably embodies all of my pessimism, and Franny embodies all of my optimism, I think. He kind of believes that humans are a plague on the world and that all we are able to do is cause destruction. And so he's kind of quite burdened by this feeling of despair, really, and not knowing really how he can kind of make an impact, or if it's too late to make an impact. But Franny, the flip side of that coin is that she has this really almost innocent love of life and the wild and just everything, that I think really opens up his heart to the idea that they can actually make a difference and be nurturing instead of destructive. And so, yeah, I guess that's the sort of fundamental relationship between the two of them, without giving anything away in terms of spoilers and what happens. And then there's the people on the boat. So Ennis is the captain, and he's kind of a bit of a shadowy figure at first. And Franny really judges him initially because he's doing this job that has harmed the seas immeasurably. She kind of can't understand why he could still be fishing with the oceans like they are. But over the course of the book and this kind of voyage, I think it's important for her to kind of move a bit beyond that judgment and try to understand him for who he is and what has led him to that life, and why he's still doing it. And on the flip side of that, he has this, he's really inspired to kind of look at wildlife in a different way because of his connection with Franny. I think it's important to have, characters who really challenge your main character's point of view, and offer up some conflict and some space for growth. And then everyone else on the boat has their own kind of individual sort of story about how they came to be living on this weird boat in the middle of nowhere and kind of having left the rest of the world. So, yeah.
That's the perfect teaser. People have to discover their stories as they read. But I think this aspect of the story, that it is this sea adventure, is what has drawn comparisons to Moby Dick. And you very bravely admitted to me that you have never read Moby Dick. But, I think it's all the better that it's still drawing these comparisons, that it is, this sort of, for once, it's like a woman at sea. I think so often these stories are kind of male-centric. So I would love for you to tell us, if not Moby Dick, a little bit about the sea stories that inspired you. I know you have some within your own family. We've talked a bit about the myth of the Selkie and kind of how that plays into Franny's story. So tell us a little bit about kind of, for you, what the sort of mythology of the sea is and how that helped you shape this book.
Yeah, so I think my love of sea stories definitely did come from my love of mythology, and in particular the Irish myth of the Selkie. So a Selkie, for anyone who doesn't know, is a person who, a seal who can shed their seal skin and become a human. And she can live on land and fall in love and have children. But the tragedy of the Selkie woman is that she'll always be bound to the sea, and never happy unless she can return to it. So I think subconsciously, it's obvious now looking back, but at the time I wasn't aware of it, but that's obviously massively informed Franny's character, and her love of the ocean, and that line that she says in the book, which is, "It's not fair to be a creature who's able to love but unable to stay." And I think Traditionally, I guess it was the role of men to go to sea and the role of women to wait by the shore for their men to return, which is probably why stories about sea voyages and boats are predominantly about men. But it's always been women who have that deep, profound connection to the ocean, I think. I think there's something in the movement of the tides, which is connected to the phases of the moon, which mirror the phases of our bodies. Maybe I'm drawing a long bow there, but I do think it's true that there's something kind of fundamentally connected in the rhythms of our bodies and the rhythms of the seas. And I know for Franny, it's like the enormity of the ocean is as big as her sense of loss. She's always wanted to be one with it, but she was born in the wrong body, and that's kind of that Selkie thing again. But I think for her, it was always inevitable that her life would culminate in a sea voyage. And my own love of the ocean, it was inevitable that I would write a book about loving the ocean.
And there are so many journeys to be had just in the ocean, and you know, the different ways that you describe the oceans, the different ways that we see Franny, you know, engaging with the water and with the, you know, the landscapes around the ocean. I'd also love to touch on another aspect of the novel that I love and that I think is so wonderful, especially now when we're all kind of locked down, which is how much of the world you cover in this book. Like the characters go all over. I mean, it begins in Greenland and ends in Antarctica, and you know, you have amazing scenes in Ireland and Nova Scotia and Australia. So tell us a little bit, you touched on this a bit, that you did extensive traveling in Ireland and in Iceland, but tell us a little bit more about, especially kind of these Arctic and Antarctic places, kind of how the research that you did, because you know, this book has so much incredible detail and realism to it. Tell us a bit about that research.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically involved me just sitting and reading for months on end because I couldn't I wish I could have just set off and gone to all of those places, but reality was that, you know, I couldn't. So, but what's kind of wonderful about, you know, this age is that we have so much information at our fingertips. And so I read and I read and I read. And unfortunately, I had chosen a whole lot of topics and places that I knew nothing about. So there was definitely a point where I felt really daunted by all the things that I didn't know. And I didn't think I'd kind of ever be able to start writing. I mean, it wasn't just the places, it was having chosen to write about a fishing boat, which I knew nothing about, you know, a whole lot of animals that I kind of didn't really know very much about. There was so much. There were so many things that I needed to kind of learn about before I could start writing. But I think there's definitely a point where you just have to kind of dive in and, you know, write around the things that you don't know. But so I was reading and watching and kind of trying to really just live those lives. And I guess in terms of, I had a little bit of help. I have a couple of scientist friends who did a read and kind of gave me some clues. And one of them had been studying in Antarctica, which was amazing. So she was able to kind of have a few little clues that really helped. But yeah, I can't really put it down to anything other than just reading like crazy and I guess trying to put myself into those worlds as much as I could so that it would feel authentic when a reader was put in those worlds.
Mm-hmm. I have a few more questions for Charlotte, but Terry, I want to make sure that I'm giving enough time for audience questions. Do we still have a little bit of time for our conversation, or how? We're still good? Okay. Well, Charlotte, I would love, now that the book has been out for coming up on 2 months, I would love to hear from you kind of what, not to put you on the spot, but like if there are reader reactions that have surprised you or reviews that surprised you, or, you know, like I think part of the publication process that is so wonderful and so scary is that the book kind of stops belonging to you at a certain point and it belongs to readers. And, you know, it doesn't really matter how we expect readers to come to it, what we expect readers to get out of it, like that becomes sort of moot, and it's all about what that interaction is between the reader and the page. So so I'd love if you could just talk a little bit about what that experience has been like, and yeah, just kind of what the surprises have been.
Well, I mean, it's been wonderful and overwhelming having people reach out to me and kind of tell me how they felt about the experience of reading the book. That's sort of something that's really nourishing as a writer. I think it's why you write these really difficult things. It's to connect. So that's been really wonderful. I guess in terms of a surprise, it's interesting to me how much it is being spoken about and framed as a climate fiction dystopian novel. And we kind of talked a little bit before about how I hadn't set out to do that. And I think in my mind, the book was always, it was actually more than anything a love story, and a story about a woman's kind of personal emotional journey to redemption and self-forgiveness and rediscovering hope and being healed by nature. So all of that stuff is how I think of it in my mind. And I guess it's a sign of the times that it's really striking a chord in terms of its comment on climate catastrophe and what's going on in the world. I think that's really kind of, it speaks to how we're all feeling at the moment and what's concerning us and what are the things that are having an impact on us. So yeah, I mean, it is of course about all of those things, so it's not that much of a surprise, but yeah, it is interesting to me that that's what gets spoken about so much. But yeah, it is amazing to have that sense of sending something out into the world and it not being just mine anymore. It's for everyone. And I've had a few people ask me, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I've had a few people ask me about certain characters and what they're doing now after the book's finished, which I always find really funny, because I kind of say, well, that's totally up to you to decide. This is one thing that I maybe imagined, but if I'd wanted that to be set in stone, I would have included that in the book. So I think, yeah, it's very much open to people making it their own and deciding what they think. And I love hearing what people have decided happens at the end of the book.
I love that too. Fan fiction.
Yeah.
And I'm also so curious, this isn't actually something that we've ever talked about before, but I wonder if because it came out in Australia and the US simultaneously, and you of course are based in Sydney, and because we're all in lockdown, it probably was a bit different than you anticipated, but I'm curious if readers and reviewers in Australia seem to be drawn to other elements of if you can kind of tell a difference in the reactions in each country, or if it really has been relatively similar.
I haven't noticed any difference really. I think it's all been really similar responses, which is, I think, speaks to that, we're globally, we're all the same and we're all worried about the same things. It's been quite amazing actually seeing that it's having the same responses from all over the world.
Mm-hmm. So since we're in a room of book lovers, I also would love to talk to you a bit about the other sorts of influences in this book. You quote Mary Oliver at a certain point. Seamus Heaney is in this. So clearly poetry is something that you love and are kind of, or that Franny certainly loves, that you yourself decided to put into the book as the author. And so I'd love to hear from you maybe specifically about what those poets mean to you, and also just if you could speak more broadly about the kinds of literature that you take solace in right now and writers who you feel like are writing about the climate and the world and nature in a way that feels especially resonant to you. I always love those kinds of recommendations. So tell us a little bit about what you've been loving.
Well, yeah, so you mentioned Mary Oliver, and I do have to say that she was crucial for me in the writing of this book. I found it quite a difficult novel to write, I think, because it takes you, it took me to some dark places, and not just in terms of the bigger stuff that's going on, but also the heartbreak of the character. So every time I would get stuck throughout the writing of it and feel like I just kind of couldn't keep going, I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't know what I was writing towards, and there were lots of those times. I'd stop and I'd go and sit in my backyard and I would read a whole book of Mary Oliver poetry and just cry and be inspired again, because she just writes so beautifully about connection to nature and how it feeds us. She's like the wisest person on the planet, or was the wisest person on the planet, and it's like she's got the secrets of the universe inside her, and who we are. And yeah, just I don't think I'll ever be as inspired by anything as I have been by her work. I also really love Jim Crumley. He's a Scottish nature writer. He writes beautiful nature writing, and I read one of his books on wolves, which was a big part of my research into my new book, which is about wolves. I loved The Overstory by Richard Powers. That's it's fiction, but it's very kind of nature focused, and you'll never look at trees in the same way again. I'm currently reading a children's Bible by Lydia Millett, and it's really great. It's very it's definitely, I would say, climate fiction, but not in a way that you would expect it to be. It's this sort of biting, savage satire written from the point of view of all the younger generation, the kids who are just furious with all of us for having destroyed the planet. I think probably they're the main ones that come to mind at the moment. I think it's really important to keep reading things that help us to feel connected and remind us how important it is to kind of value our natural world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a perfect note to change gears. So I would love to open it up to any questions that you all have for Charlotte or for me. So if not, I can just keep asking. I could talk to her for hours and hours, but I don't want to hog her. So if anyone else has a question that they'd like to ask.
And we can talk about the editing process and the publishing process as well, if anyone's curious about any of that, and what the editing process was like for us, how it all started, if that's of interest.
Why don't you touch on that just for a minute, and then I've just unmuted everyone, so if anyone has a question, they can go to the I believe it's the participants panel that you can access, again, bottom of the Zoom screen, and you can raise your hand, and then we will call on you so you can ask your question directly of either Carolyn or Charlotte. So, but I think one of the reasons I like having the editor on is for them to actually talk about that process. And I'm just going to put in one of my own questions about how the cover went from what it started as to the incredibly gorgeous cover it has now, and maybe talk a little bit about how you make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah. Well, I can get us started. So as I said, Charlotte and I have been working together for close to 3 years now, and I first came across her book because her literary agent sent it to me. So it pinged into my email inbox along with a cover letter that was instantly just catnip for me, and I fell in love with it right away, and we had our first call, which is always a really important part of the author-editor relationship, because you want to make sure that you're on the same page. Like the worst thing is for an editor to acquire a book and then ask the author to make major changes that they're not okay with. Like, it's a collaborative process, but at the end of the day, it's not my book, it's Charlotte's book. So everything that I do is to kind of help her hone her vision as much as she can and, kind of fulfill the intention of the book. So we had a really wonderful initial call, and I ended up acquiring the book from her agent. And so then we began the editorial part of our relationship, which is a very kind of intimate process. For a lot of writers, they haven't worked with an editor before, and so a lot of the job is just kind of earning their trust. And like when I ask her to change something relatively significant, making sure that she understands why I'm asking her to do that and where I'm coming from. And then also like me trusting her when she pushes back that, like even if some of my comments resonate, not all of them will. And, having this open dialogue that is respectful and, we're both coming from places of understanding. And so like, even when we disagree, it's still advancing the editorial process and we're still, getting to a better place with the book. And then once the editing was done, that was sort of only the beginning of the publishing process. So the life cycle of a book is a very long and drawn out thing, but so like between when you have the finished manuscript and when the book is actually available in bookshops, it's usually a year, if not longer. And, many, many things have to happen during that time. And Charlotte, had the relationship with me first, but so many people at the publishing house end up touching the book. And so as the editor, I'm sort of introducing her to all of these other important people in the process. So, her publicist, the marketers that are marketing the book, the sales team that's selling the book, the rights team that's selling it around the world. And then, as we get further along, booksellers and librarians, sending early galleys out to readers, on Goodreads and platforms like that. Finding the perfect book jacket, which sometimes takes a couple of tries. As Terry said, we had a very different cover initially, and we got feedback at various times that we decided to heed, and we don't always do that. Sometimes we stick to our guns and stick with a cover even if you can't please everyone with it. But I think in this case, the cover that we ended up with is so gorgeous and fits the book so well. And I think, I can't even imagine that we ever had another cover now. It is the book now. So that's just a very kind of quick snapshot. But Charlotte, do you want to add anything about what it's been like from your side of things?
Well, it's been wonderful. I mean, it's so important to have a great working relationship with your editor. And for me, I don't workshop my stuff with anyone before I finish the book and send it to you. So it's really important, if you're the first eyes that see it, that we can have a really beneficial working relationship, and it's been so wonderful. You've made both the books now so much stronger, and so I appreciate it so much. It's been really, really fantastic.
Yeah, and it's been so amazing to get to work on the second book as well, because when the first book comes in, you've already been working on it for a really long time. It has a certain amount of polish on it. You had feedback from your agent, you had really prepared it for submission. And we still did quite a lot of editing, but it was already a more finished product. And so I think it was so helpful that we'd already had that experience when you turned in the next book, because that one was at a kind of earlier stage. And I was able to, as an editor, it's so much fun to be kind of in it with you from an earlier point and to kind of get to watch it grow up in a way. So yes, it's been wonderful, and hopefully many more books
Yes.
in our future. So.
Okay, let's open it up. Nita?
I have a
ahead.
question. I read Station 11, and I also saw that you had that on the cover by Emily St. John Mandel. I know that I've heard other stories about how people get quotes, for their books. Can you talk as a publisher about that?
Yeah, definitely. That was such a wonderful dream blurb, I would say. So we call them blurbs.
Yeah.
Which is basically just the publishing term for those quotes that you get from other authors. And there are all kinds of tricks that publishers use to get some of those quotes. Sometimes it's the authors going to their own other authors asking them for quotes. Sometimes it's, people who the authors took classes from, and not to diminish those blurbs at all. Sometimes they're incredibly sincere still and so generous, and we're very grateful for them. But kind of the holy grail of a blurb is when a writer that you think will really love it, but who has no connection to the author, ends up really loving it. And that was the case with Emily St. John Mandel. We sent it to her kind of on a prayer, and she, I think she also kind of started reading it perhaps a bit grudgingly, and just was instantly pulled in and gave us this incredible quote that I think captures the book so well, and her own excitement about it. And I think, when you have, Charlotte's book is very different from Station 11 in a lot of ways, yes. But I do think there are some kind of thematic similarities. And so I think to have her name on the cover, to signal to people who loved her book, it's just another way to draw them in to this one. So that's an important part of deciding who you're going to go to with blurbs, is like who you kind of want to like find those overlapping audiences. So
yeah, I just thought that it seemed like it was a similar flavor of some kind, but not really the same,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Really well said.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I do. It's Pat Lucy. Just a quick question. Would you pronounce the name of the fishing boat, please?
I say in my head, the Sagani.
Sagani. Thank you.
But I actually don't, I have a suspicion that that's not how you would pronounce it. Inuit people would pronounce it. I think I actually heard it's Sagani in reality. But I'd only ever read it, so I always mispronounced it in my head.
I've always mispronounced it too then. I always said the Sagani as well.
It came up for the narration in the audiobook. She asked me how I pronounce it, so I looked it up just to be sure, and then was horrified to realize I had been doing it wrong the whole time.
Thank you.
Waiting to see if anyone else jumps in. And
I'll chime in here. I have a question. Charlotte, what is your writing routine like? Do you work at certain times of the day, or do you just write when you're inspired, or can you talk a little bit about that, what your process is?
Yeah, sure. I've definitely historically been an evening night writer, which is really impractical when you want to have a normal life. So I've been trying to shift into more sort of day writing. But mostly I would say, my mornings are, I like to call it input and output. So my input time feeds my creative inspiration, and I get that from all kinds of things: reading, going for a walk, listening to music, watching a movie, whatever it may be. And then that kind of fuels me to have my output time, which is more, it's definitely more afternoon, evening. And that's kind of been the way it's been for yeah, a long time now, but I'm trying to shift it more. I'm finding the inspiration is not as it's not coming as often anymore, and maybe that's to do with this whole crazy pandemic thing. It's just a weird time for focus. So I'm really trying to switch off from screens and kind of not have my phone in my life anymore, because I just need to be able to kind of get back to that kind of creative space.
Thank you.
We have time for one last question. Okay, then I'll ask it. Okay, wolves, give us a elevator pitch, or at least give us a hint.
Okay, so the next book is about a wolf biologist who has been charged with reintroducing wolves into a Scottish Highlands forest in order to rewild the ecosystem. And she gets a lot of pushback from the locals there, who are farmers, and see the wolves as a threat to their livestock. It's a mystery and a love story, and it's a story about the healing power of nature, which is clearly a theme I come back to a lot. So there's the elevator pitch.
That was perfect.
Okay, you guys, when?
Next summer.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. I don't even know how to begin to thank the two of you for such an engaging and lovely conversation. And from my viewpoint, two such lovely young women, so accomplished and so well thought out. And it was just a pleasure to have you. And I'm very, very grateful to both of you.
So much, Terry.
So much, Terry.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.